Okay. Good to see everyone. Welcome. I know most of you. My name's Eric Alexander. For those I haven't met, I know that we always try and start on time. I know many have to jump in, though, a little bit on the later side, and some have to leave early, so completely fine. Wanted to welcome you to our session, I believe, number 3 or so in our 8-part medical education research series. And I'll come back and introduce Sue Warthman here, our medical librarian, in one second. I just want to make some quick announcements. Next slide, E. I just wanted to kind of put in your calendar, if you're interested in even as many of these as you can join, we welcome you to do so. This is our second, study questions and literature review, and our next one will be December 2nd. And again, these will, at least right now, be mostly virtual, but as the hopefully pandemic recovers, we can adjust on the fly. Next slide, please. Also want to just put on your radar screen a really fun series that's been headed by Nareth Carlisle in the BEI and then Igal Rosen. We are into the practical aspects of artificial intelligence. We talked about assessment using an expert here from Duolingo, and then we have another one here on November 11th next week as it relates to learning. Ulrich Christensen from Area 9. So these are outside industry partners that have been very effective in artificial intelligence as it relates to education. So I invite you to put that in your calendar as well at 12 noon. Next slide, E. And also welcome anyone to join kind of our internal medical education growth series. We review academic medicine last pages. And our next one here is November 12th with an expert who leads a discussion. These are 45 minutes. There's no preparation. Thanks to Christina Dezara for putting these together. Welcome anyone to this. Next slide. Our Global Medical Education Cafe brings together a community of medical educators worldwide, and we're excited to have Francesco Bolstead from Nara University in Japan lead a discussion in a fun hour at 7:30 in the morning, so we can fit everyone in across the globe on November 17th, if your calendar may work. And finally, last slide. I want to just announce our new series that will debut in the new year, which relates to effectively peer reviewing as it relates to medical education and literature, a skill that I think all of our growing medical educators should know. And Christina Dezara will lead this along with many experts. As you see, it should be a great 3-part series. So please also put this in your calendar if you can, and we'll keep these out in front and advertised around. Finally, last slide here, EE. I just want to thank Sue, our medical librarian within the Brigham Education Institute, for being a part of this and to leading this very important discussion on study questions and how you really access the literature to move from there. With that, I'm going to turn it over to the lead on this whole series, which is Subha Ramani. I will mention 2 things. One is we do monitor the chat box actively, so thank you, Christina, for doing that. Anyone feel free at any time to write in the chat box. We also record this series, so if you don't want to be shown on your video, just turn off your camera. Thank you, and over to you, Subha.
Thank you, Eric. And this is, as you said, the second of the, God knows, I think we've been increasing the series number every year, but this is the second, and we're very, very thrilled to introduce to all of you our scholars, the BEI Fundamentals of Educational Research Scholars, or FOER scholars. And I'm going to start with Erica, our overseas scholar from Ireland. Okay, and then we have Ryan. I'm going in order, Ryan. Ryan is masked and socially distanced over there. And then Jed, Irene, Shoshana, and Jacob. So, and Ala Eldam is the program coordinator for the Department of Medicine program, the end of the program. So welcome to her as well. With that, next slide, please, Yi. I'm going to recap session 1 on the series, which is Professor Ed Krupat's 10 Steps to an Educational Project, which I always enjoy hearing about. Next, the first step. All right, so the first step is clearly defining the research questions you want to ask. And I'm going to just emphasize that right at the first step, literature review and knowledge of the literature, knowledge of the topic becomes quite important. So the focus, for us to establish a clear focus, a literature review helps us. What has been done before and what has not been answered and what maybe we can answer. bouncing your ideas off colleagues, mentors, and friends. Next, please. So I would actually say consult the literature right from the get-go to know what we want to explore. So, but then what Ed is referring to here in step 3 is much more of a detailed literature review. And I would encourage everybody to set up a time with Susan Warthman to actually sit down and go through your own personalized search. There's nothing like it. Then define what approaches and methods best suit your project. Once again, the literature can inform what methodology and methods might actually work to answer the question we wish to answer. Next, please. So next is research design. And I think Ed and Eric talked about research design at the last session. But research design is also something that we can look at in the literature. What have others done? What design have they used? Is this a design that will fit in with where I'm going, fit in with my worldview, fit in with my philosophy? And similarly, identifying measures and instruments that will help us answer the research questions. If there is an appropriate instrument and measure, why not use it? There is no point in reinventing the wheel for no reason whatsoever. Next, please. So think about how you'll analyze the data. Perhaps literature review plays less of a role in this step, but you can still have some guidance from how others have walked before us. And then make sense of your data by asking yourself what story you want to tell. Next, please. And determine the right place to present or publish your results. For this, a literature review is really important. Where have people published? What kinds of articles have they published? What the journal guidelines are? And then finally, write a first draft, ask colleagues for feedback, ask them to trash it, to be honest. The more they trash it, the better it gets. And then revise through multiple drafts. The one thing I always tell people is don't fall in love with your draft, because it's not the best thing since sliced bread. There's always a better way of doing it. In fact, it's probably a joke, but real. If you send me enough versions, I will keep on finding 100 things to revise until I stop and say, please stop. I think it's diminishing return at this point. Okay, with that, over to Susan.
Sorry about that. Thanks to the BEI team for assisting me on this presentation. You could go to the next slide, please. So basically, I just wanted to go over this short slide about a literature review. All these things you probably know, but I would just like to go over them before we proceed with the study questions. So the literature review is going to qualitatively summarize the evidence on your topic. And as we've already mentioned, hopefully you've already dabbled and explored different topics and maybe done some concept mapping and some mind mapping and chosen the topic that you want to explore and how you want to explore it. You're going to provide a summary of the topic, of course, and it's going to depend on if it's a broad question or a specific question. You know, everything depends on what you want to examine. The components are listed there. The timeline will vary. And the most important thing is that you know your topic. And that's what I would like to emphasize over and over again, is that that study question is going to really dictate everything you do. You should know the databases that you want to use based on the topics that you've chosen and the question you've chosen. Next slide, please. So just to recap, a well-formulated question is going to start the whole process. It's going to provide you focus for your searches, and it's going to help you select literature you want to include or exclude. So in other words, when you examine what's out there, what is the gap? not only do you want to tell a story, but you also want to provide information that hasn't been provided before. So what is the gap in the literature? Because that's what your research question will provide. Next slide, please. So your study question should be very objective. It should be concise, feasible, relevant, and valuable. Next slide. And so in order to help you formulate a good question, there are templates, if you will, or formats. If you're going to do a systematic review, perhaps a PICO question would be good. That's for the clinical research. There's what they call the spider review for qualitative and mixed method studies. It's adapted from the PICO tool. Next slide. So that's what the PICO is: patient population problem, intervention, comparison, or outcome. Next slide. And then the spider is probably something that you're all probably more interested in using, perhaps. It's going to consist of the sample population, the phenomena of interest, again, the design that you choose to take, how you're going to evaluate your sample, and what type of research you're going to actually use. Next slide, please. And so this is probably going to seem very elementary, but I do like to go over Boolean operators with folks. My point here being that Boolean operators are going to do different things within the databases. So when you use two concepts and you connect them with and, they're different concepts, and it's going to tell the database, you know, give me all the results with both those words. Next slide. And then the Boolean operator or is when you want to combine your synonyms. Basically, when you're setting up your search strategy, you want to use or for the synonyms. So it tells the database to give you results that contain any of the words you've entered. Next slide. And the Boolean operator not basically tells you, the database, to give you the results that contain the words you've entered, except the word following not. Now, when you first start your process, your literature search, I don't recommend using not, because it's going to limit your set of results, and you're trying to acquire information. But I just want to throw it out there. And also too, each database has its own intricacies. So some databases will use phrases when you put quotes around it. So in other words, when you put quotes around words, it recognizes it as a phrase. But not all databases recognize the quotes, the quotation marks. So you really need to learn the intricacies of whatever database you choose to use when you start searching. Next slide. So in our breakout session, which is going to happen next, what we're going to do is we're going to examine two questions, and we're going to pull up pubmed.gov. So we're going to basically look at these questions and examine the concepts in the question and try to think of synonyms and other words and formulate a very short search strategy. So, you know, you're going to, again, attach different concepts with and then or together all the synonyms. And initially, I just want you to think in terms of separating the idea in the question into different major concepts that you'll search in PubMed. So it's literally pubmed.gov, www.pubmed.gov. Each group will have a record keeper and keep track of the words that you chose for each question, and then list your strategy and how you developed and refined your search strategy. Next slide, please. Okay, so question 1 has less words, less concepts. So it'll probably be easier for folks to use that. And then in question 2, there's a few more concepts and ideas. So sometimes less is more when you do this. You can do individual words or you can combine them. But the great thing about PubMed is it uses natural processing language, which is talked about in AI, that we talked about in our AI series. And so it's going to recognize the words, and the algorithms that run the database are going to formulate and work behind the scenes, assisting you. And then you have to manipulate the words and the strategy that you use to hone in on the results that you really want. So it's a process. The whole thing is a process. So I think we'll probably take about 10 minutes. And if you wouldn't mind putting us into groups, and we'll take it from there. Hello. So is everybody back? Who wants to talk about the work that they did for question 1? How many groups did we end up having?
We had a total of 4 groups.
Yeah, okay. And so did you want to go through each group, and then we'll have the record keeper kind of summarize what they went over and what they did?
Yeah, it's up to you. That sounds like a reasonable plan.
Sounds
Yeah, let's start with, go ahead.
No, I said that sounds like a very good plan. So group 1 is your group, Susan. So did you appoint a group reporter?
Yeah, that's me.
Yes, Erica was our reporter.
Excellent.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So we started off with keywords. So we were doing the first question. So we did keywords of clinical teacher, professional identity, and learners. And Susan put them into the database and we got 14 results, which is really nice. She just briefly went through those results. And the first one was an article which is basically bang on the money. So we had a quick look through that and started looking through some of the mesh terms that were used, and things like qualitative research and things were popped up. So they were added to the search. And then just in general, we had a kind of a chat around it and looked at some of the articles which were cited within that key paper. And anything that was saved was generally saved onto the clipboard, just as kind of a temporary holding area. And Susan just went through some of the other strategies which we could go through at the end. So it was going through maybe go to PubMed to the Explore section to look at the database, to look at key terms. And she also mentioned, sorry, Susan, if I'm getting this wrong, but hedges, which are search strategies, which have been already developed by librarians and could be used for search strategies. So that was basically group 1.
Yep, that's great. Awesome summary. And the next group?
I think that may have been our group. We got less into specifically trying to tease out the question and talk more generally about an approach to learning more about what we were looking into. And so thought about starting globally and then narrowing our focus, and thought about starting even with just a Google search of that question itself, just to see what pops up in terms of helping us better identify our key terms or mesh terms and what may be there in the literature, so we can kind of speak the language of what's already in the literature, and help in the Google search, just kind of helping us identify topics or foundations or different institutions that are working in this space. And then we talked about going then to PubMed with more refined key terms or mesh terms, and searching what's there. And when we find papers that we like, sort of using those mesh terms or key terms, looking at their bibliography and other related suggested papers on the topic.
Yep, perfect. I would also suggest too, you can copy and paste that question right into the PubMed search box rather than Google. And actually, that is the title of an article. And that was the first one. Even when I did a keyword search with the concepts, that popped up #1. And so the natural processing language that's used in PubMed and in Google, it's the same and it works the same. So you can put anything in PubMed, the PMID, a citation, the title of an article, the author, and pretty much anything that you know, and just pop it in that search box, and it usually pulls back good results. Okay, how about the third group? Who was in the third group?
Eric's group.
Oh, we're group, sorry, we were group 3. Shosh, are you able to?
Sorry, I thought we were group 4.
Yeah, I did too, sorry.
All right. So we started playing around with broad PubMed searches. We started with resident burnout, which yielded 2,000 results. So then we modified
started with what?
Resident burnout.
Oh.
Which
Yep.
many people have published on. So way too broad. And then we modified that to medical resident perception and resident burnout. And we got 600 hits, but just scanning them quickly, it looked like they were very irrelevant to the main question. So then we tried resident perception of leadership and burnout, and we got 17 hits. And the first hit was the seminal article from which this question was produced. And then we spoke about, and the rest of that 17 hit list looked actually quite relevant and useful. So then we spoke about looking through those articles, looking at their bibliographies, and then using their mesh terms and keywords. Although we wanted to ask you what the difference between mesh terms and keywords is.
Yeah, so I had explained in my group that each database usually has its own controlled vocabulary or thesaurus. So PubMed uses the medical subject headings. So in other words, indexers or catalog librarians literally read these articles and they apply concepts and terms. They apply terms to the concepts in the article. And that's what becomes the mesh terms. And once they get mesh terms, that's when they're indexed in Medline.
And Sue, I thought, Shosh, that was great. I thought I might share just our group's search process. If you could unshare, I'll share my screen real quick, because I just thought it was very telling to us. So as Shosh was mentioning, we wandered upon the lead article, the seminal article, ultimately in terms of kind of 3 phrases. And one of the challenges, we had kind of a complex question that we had to look at and think about. And we came back into kind of paraphrasing, pieces of it and use the and Boolean operator. But I always find it myself, I'm just going to share my own kind of process. When you go and look at the advanced process, these are the 7 searches that we had gone through. And, our first phrase was resident burnout, just to see what we pulled up, and you get 2,000 hits. Medical resident perception, we got almost 7,000 hits. When we combined those 2, we got 140. Yet when you combined, kind of similar using wellness, we got 229. So a little bit always of the question is, what are we missing sometimes, or why are we getting extras, And I thought that was interesting. Sue, if you want to comment on that, or maybe that's just the way the exploratory process works.
Yeah, I mean, it is definitely an exploratory process. And that's why I depend on the tools. For instance, in PubMed, there's a search builder tool, and it helps you find the mesh terms, put them in the database, and then formulate the strategy that way. Because it is complicated, and I can't explain the algorithm that helps run it.
And I thought, Sue, I would also show what you mentioned. When we search residency leadership, we get almost 4,000 hits. When you put it in quotes, so the phrase has to be fully connected, we only had 40, right? So you can use quotes sometimes to really cut down your search.
Exactly, yes. Yes. So yeah, it's an experiment, if you will, of playing with key terms and subject headings or the controlled vocabulary of the database, and using those Boolean operators, and just keep honing in, and ultimately, the point of the whole talk is the study question is what's going to drive it all. So that's really you'll find that you might have to revise your question. You might have to revise everything along the way, re-examine the topic, re-examine the articles, redo the question perhaps. I mean, you might change your mind and decide, well, I found all this literature, but I really want to look at this. And, it's going to just depend on what you choose and what you find, if you find anything. So, did all the groups report back?
We have group 4.
Okay.
And Jake is the reporter, and any laziness on our part can be entirely attributed to me.
We actually, we had a similar process. We started in Google Scholar, and that's, I don't, for better or for worse, that's sort of my habit for like the initial broad search. And we had a very similar process. The first thing we tried was residency burnout, and that led to 30. Well, Google Scholar gives you too many hits, but it's pretty good at getting at front loading the most relevant stuff. So that led to 32,000 hits, and just scanning the first few titles, it didn't seem to be terribly productive. We then added residency burnout and leadership, and that gave like the article that you mentioned in academic medicine, as well as over the first page several others that looked relevant. One thing that I like about Google Scholar is you can click on like the papers that cite the index paper. And so you can, this index paper was published in 2020, so it only has 7 citations, but a handful of those also, are even more recent and also looked relevant.
Yeah, well, the same functionality exists in PubMed too. So, I mean, you can do the same thing in PubMed, and as I say, it is a database of bibliographic citations, and Google is a search engine, so you may have a preference for using Google, but of course I'm a librarian and I advocate using the databases. There's more than just PubMed, believe me.
Yeah.
So Susan, I have one question.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us a little bit about the ERIC database? Not the with a C, not a K?
Yes, that's education. So it's a government free website, and it's ERIC. It's listed on our library webpage as one of the databases to use. And it focuses on teaching and learning and education. There might not be a lot that's specific to medicine, but you'll find basic theory, educational theory and whatnot in that database, and you'll find articles that you wouldn't find in PubMed. So it's a good, depending on your topic, it's a good alternative.
Do we need a separate account, or can we access it through our existing Countway account?
Okay, Countway is Harvard's medical library, and then Brigham and Women's Hospital has our own virtual library, and we use our library through Pike Notes, which is the hospital intranet. So if you're off campus, you might not be able to get to it because it's based out of the intranet. But I can always help you and find what you need and work with you one-on-one. And I also have access to the Harvard databases, so I can use them for you.
And Sue, I thought I would just play the fun of what Subha just brought up. So if I'll share my screen, I just pulled up the ERIC database. When you put in medical resident perception and burnout, I just grabbed 2 quick phrases. You get a good article we wouldn't have gotten that included Winnie the Pooh, it looks like, or something of the sort. So it is just different is the reason I share.
Yes, it's very different. Yes. And there's many.
Could I ask you a question, Ed, which is when you start a new project, and this may not all happen in one sitting, but can you tell us, Ed, how much time you place into just kind of flying around PubMed and associated database to think about, to learn about the basis of what's out there already?
I may be be giving a bad answer simply because usually I get involved in a project in which I already have a reasonable amount of interest in and some background in. So basically, I'm usually focused on a series of studies that I'm familiar with. And at that point, I would start from what I know and try to expand outward, as opposed to coming upon a new area where you're trying to define the outer definitions and focusing inward. So those are two different strategies depending on where you're starting from. But you know, usually, and what's also wonderful is the fact that you can, if you get a key article, certainly a review article, whether systematic or scoping or whatever, you've got their bibliography.
Mhm.
And because again, you'd like to think that a good review article has defined the field and done that work for you. You know, again, it depends on how familiar you are, whether you want to start in and move outward, or start outward and then find what's at the center.
Yeah, but it goes to show one thing, I think, which Susan said, Eric has been saying, is all of us should absolutely make use of Susan's expertise and do a one-on-one with Susan. There's, I myself, I'm already thinking, and all of us should make use of her skills in this set. Yeah.
Yeah, or if you're at another institution in another country or another state, definitely take advantage of the librarians at your institution because they can help you. And just remember too that each institution, academic or hospital library, they'll have their own set of databases and subscriptions. So, and they'll have a better understanding of those databases as well. So don't forget about your librarians.
Well, I'll second that, and that is, I've been working with medical librarians for a long time, and every time I'm either stumped or I think I'm not interested or able, and then I talk to a medical librarian, including Sue, they take it as a challenge. This is their life's work. It's like, you know, so I always come and I figure I'm annoying that person, and that person says, "Oh, great, another challenge. Let's do it." So I will double Sue's comment about the value of medical librarians as people who are not only talented at doing this, but always kind of welcoming and motivated about doing it.
And I'll just share from an institutional perspective, my own perspective, which is that I always underestimated, probably still do, the amount of material that our respective institutions actually purchase. Scholarly access, whether it's journals, databases, tools, etc. But there is an enormous amount behind the scenes, and you kind of don't know what's there until you start playing around. But you know, increasingly, as I've explored with Sue's help, and now that I help pay the bills a little bit, it's a lot behind the scenes. And so sometimes you'll find that the search engine or the whatever, the database you know, process from one publisher just makes life easier because it links things together. And so that can be another way. So Sue would be the resource for all of those questions.
Thanks, Eric. I'd like to also mention one thing. Erica, who has a role in the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ireland, has been a co-author on a recent Best Evidence Medical Education article that's been published. And I would strongly encourage all of us to actually at least communicate, keep a chat going with Erica and amongst us on Teams, because she can probably tell us how it was, because this is the evidence, you know, Cochrane database or systematic review version of medical education. So I not today, but, you know, I think we should start a conversation and get some ideas from Erica as well.
Yeah, absolutely. More than happy. Our institution is actually an international collaborating center. So we're kind of like a review center. So that's what we do. We produce reviews and we peer review them. So always open to any questions.
Thank you, Erica. Susan, do you want to bring a wrap up with any other important comments?
Well, EE, you could probably show that last slide. I did have a final slide, if you can find it. After that, yeah. So basically determine a topic to add to the existing literature. Define your research question, choose concepts, terms, and vocabulary, and use the Boolean operators accordingly. Know your database and how to use it. And most important of all is document and keep track of your searches, especially if you use more than one database. So every single word and search strategy that you use, you want to make sure that you keep track of it all. So, you know, you can make a template, or I can give you a template so you can keep track of it, because if you're going to publish, they're going to want to know what you did and how you did it. So that's probably.
And so I wonder, just maybe I'll just emphasize this, but if you could comment, you know, many of the search engines, including PubMed, they have a sign-in function so you can personalize and track things. And I personally underuse that. I just go and put my search term in the box, but I think if you sign in yourself, it can help you keep those searches. Is that right?
Yes, yes, of course. Every vendor, every database you use, they have that opportunity up at the top. Usually there's like a little icon to sign in or log in. And I highly recommend it because they'll save your search strategies and your search results for you on their server. And it just, you know, you'll forget probably from 1 month to the next what you did. And so this way it helps you keep track. Also, just use a really good citation tool like Zotero or EndNote or Mendeley, whatever you use. Everything that you find, you can put in your citation manager and store it in a file folder, and that will help keep you organized as well. Any questions or comments about anything that was spoken about today? I know it might seem kind of elementary to some of you.
I was just going to mention that I wouldn't personally attempt to publish anything with the search strategy that hasn't been guided by a research librarian personally. I think you might just end up getting to a very long process and then the journal will just reject you. So that would be my recommendation.
And there's lots of other software out there that can help you. You know, there's lots of other things to keep you on track. So I can talk about them with you one-on-one if you really want to delve in further.
Thanks, Susan. That is, I think we did, we discussed quite a lot within an hour and made it interactive. Thanks to you, thanks to Eric, thanks to Ed, Christina, and everyone. And thank you, Erica, for your suggestions as well.